So the Justin Tucker one is super interesting to me. And I had said this on a couple of interviews, and then I got a call this last week from a former kicker, and we were talking about it, and he had said the exact same things without either of us knowing, that we had talked about it and done interviews, but we said the exact same thing. And that Justin Tucker is dealing with failure for the first time in his career.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It never is. I bring it for you guys every single day on this show, Monday through Friday, as well as the other shows, College Draft Podcast, which I'm hoping a bunch of you check out this week. I put it on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast feed because I love college football, and I want you to hear me talking about college football and my favorite game of the year, Army-Navy, although unfortunately I'm not on the call for Army-Navy this week. A little bit upsetting, but that's okay. I have an NFL game, which is very cool. Patriots, Cardinals. Obviously, the Even Money Podcast, we're both up 30 units approximately on the year. I don't understand why anyone who bets football doesn't listen or watch that show. It's extremely successful. Like, why not listen or watch the show where the people actually win? We'll record the Fantasy Feast 2 episodes with John Daigle today. Looking forward to that. The wisdom today comes from my colleague at CBS, Jay Feely. I wanted some wisdom about what's going on with the kickers this year in the NFL, both positively and negatively. So why not Big Show? Jay Feely, presented by Labatt Blue Light. Love drinking Labatt Blue Light when I'm with Jay. Hopefully he has some at his house Friday night with friends, family. He lives out in Arizona, so we're hanging out at Jay's house Friday night. Love Labatt Blue Light. Probably going to have a couple tonight, actually. Going out to dinner with one of our favorite couples. Always enjoy responsibly beer. Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York.
The Big Show.
Yes, I've been waiting to get this guy on all season. My partner in crime on CBS. We've got the Patriots at the Cardinals on Sunday, a home game, actually.
That's right.
For my buddy Jay Feely, who lives out there in Arizona. There's a lot going on this year in the NFL, but in particular on the kicking aspect, which is why I wanted to bring on Jay. Unbelievable story. 14 years in the NFL as a kicker, spent a couple years after his time at Michigan in like arena ball, just trying to get a chance. But back in the day, Jay, I feel like that used to be a lot of guys' stories for how they first got their shot in the league.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't uncommon. You think of guys like Robbie Gould, who became one of the best kickers of all time, spent some time out. There are a number of guys who, had to try to make their way. And when you have 32 jobs in the world and you have guys that play 15 or 20 years, Ross, there's only 1 or 2 jobs available each year. I mean, when you think of an offensive lineman like yourself, you got 7 or 8 on every team plus the practice squad. So there's a lot of opportunities, to get a look. When you have 32 jobs, there's no backups on any team and guys play for 20 years. It's a really small window to get that opportunity.
It's a zero-sum game, too.
Right. I mean, you come in, you miss a couple of kicks, boom, you're going to get cut. Now, maybe you're one shot. Like, okay, you had your chance. Sorry, go into that insurance career or whatever you're doing next.
Gosh, I feel like if I was a kicker, it'd be like, what's that movie where she pushes the other girl down the steps to so that she can become like the star of the show?
Well, it's funny because you hear a lot about like quarterbacks mentoring guys or receiver mentoring guys. And I was always nice to guys when they were coming in trying to take my job, but I was not going to help them. I was not going to sit there and like work with them on their technique and like, hey, here's what you should do. Because it is cutthroat. Like they are trying to take your job. And if they get your job, you don't have a job and you're sitting at home.
I felt the same way sometimes about some of the younger offensive linemen. Like, I'm not helping that guy. They want the younger, cheaper guy. They want that guy. Now, if they came up to me and asked me something, I wouldn't tell them the wrong thing necessarily, but that makes sense. All right, so I've asked this a couple times during our games for CBS, but every week there's like another 10 kicks made over 50 yards.
No.
These guys making 57, 58. You see guys making 61. We're doing Patriots Cardinals. Joey Sly didn't miss a 68-yarder by that much. I mean, it was not that far off. I guess I want to know, why are kickers so much better, I guess in general, but in particular kicking from long distance now?
Yeah, there's a couple reasons. And the best way I can explain it is to kind of like walk you through my career. And I was much stronger physically and in great shape without a lot of injuries early in my career. So I could kick the ball further early in my career. But I was a much better kicker from long range. I had my longest kick, 61 yards, late in my career. You go back and you look, I had more 50-yarders in the last 5 years of my career than I did in my first 5 years. So even though my body wasn't as strong and I wasn't, kicking the ball further, I was better from long range. And I think that's because you get better at hitting the ball in the sweet spot. You think about a golfer like a Fred Couples, who's been doing it for 40 years and can still drive the ball a long ways because he's going to hit the ball in the middle of the club face every single time. And so for me, as I was able to go through 10, 15 years of kicking the exact same way, you get better and better and more consistent. You hit the ball better and more consistently, so it comes off and it goes further. So a lot of these young guys now are starting out doing camp starting at 10 years old. And they're getting good instruction from an early age, and so they have that same form. So if you're starting at 10, by the time you're 30, you've got 20 years of kicking the ball the exact same way and having the right form and repeating the same thing over and over. Whereas when I came out, even through college and into the NFL, I was just trying to figure it out on my own. There wasn't all these camps that were really good about giving you instruction and teaching you the right way to do things. So that's a big reason why. And the other reason is just because guys started lifting, working out, and doing everything. Even at the beginning of my career, in 2000, guys were not lifting and working out as much. Now, the older guys certainly weren't. The younger guys were. It was kind of this new wave. And if you think about it with offensive linemen, imagine when that tipping point happened for offensive linemen, when somebody decided, oh, I'm going to start lifting and I'm going to lift hard. All of a sudden you have one guy who was a whole lot stronger than everybody else. And then those guys said, oh, I got to catch up. And I think that's what happened in the last 10, 15 years with the kicking position.
That makes a lot of sense. It's funny because I remember I played 01 to 08, and I remember being on one team, and the punter was like a maniac. I mean, in terms of what he ate and working out and lifting, and he would always say his body was his temple. And the kicker just kind of showed up and was good. It was like those guys could not have been more polar opposite in terms of their mentality and their approach. I guess what's interesting though is I mentioned Sly. I think it was this past game. He missed a 28-yarder, right? So these guys are making the 50-yarders, the 60-yarders. The last game you and I did, Titans-Texans, Fairbairn sets the record for most 50-yard field goals in a season, and then he misses the chip shot to tie the game late. What's the deal? And I asked you this during the game, so I kind of know what your answer is, but what is the deal with that?
Well, hold on. My favorite part of the entire season is when you jumped in and you were breaking down kicking, and you were breaking down the poor form that somebody had when they missed it.
That was Raiders Browns.
That made my day.
I think his plant leg was too close to the ball.
So it's really mental. That's what it comes down to. You think about Ray Finkel and not being able to get over his miss, and and that there's truth in that though. It's funny, and usually things are funny because there's an element of truth in them. And that's how it is with the kicking game. I mean, you have to be able to handle things mentally. And that's what separates the guys that are at home who can kick 50-yard field goals and the guys that are on NFL Sundays out there doing it, is that they can handle it mentally and they can handle failure. And so for a guy like Fairbairn, who's been kicking the ball so well all year and then misses that kick, mentally, I'm just going to assume he was not in it as much. He didn't focus as much as he had to. It's a short kick. Just go out there, go through the motions. It's an easy kick. I'm going to make it. And all of a sudden, he's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just missed that. And you go back, and you watch and your form's off and you're like, why did I like focus the way I needed to on that kick the same way I would have on a 50-yarder? Because when you go out and you're going to hit a 50-yarder, you know everything has to be perfect. Your form has to be perfect, steps, all that kind of stuff. And guys just get lackadaisical sometimes. And then, you know, when you talk about a young guy, a college kid or a high school kid, and making those game winners and how hard it is, and why do some of those college kids really struggle? It's all mental. It's the pressure of the moment and being able to handle, like, if I miss this kick, this is what's going to happen. And, or even, you know, their mind starts wandering and thinking about, if I make this kick, these are all the good things that are going to happen. And they lose focus on the actual fundamentals that are going to help them make that kick.
It's interesting about like the Fairbairn one, because that was a game tying kick with less than 2 minutes. Like, how are you not focused and locked in mentally? Like that, I understand. You know more than I do, but like,
but think about it, right? Think about it from an offensive line. There are plays and reps where you get lulled to sleep, and you're not as locked in as you should be. You know, a receiver runs a route; it's an easy pass, and he drops it. Right? He doesn't look it in. There's nobody around him. He's thinking about moving, his next move and going upfield, and you don't look that ball in. There's many times where we, you know, do things athletically, and we're not as focused on exactly what we should be focused on. Obviously, that kick and the magnitude of the kick, but I'm sure he was just thinking, like, it's an easy kick. Like, I can go out here and I'm going to make this in my sleep, and then you miss one.
Right. You know, it's interesting, though, because that can explain, like, Fairbairn missing the chip shot. But how do you explain guys that for years are so good, and then all of a sudden, like, whatever's going on with Dustin Hopkins this year, in particular Justin Tucker this year, Jake Elliott, you know, Jake Elliott's 0 for 5 from over 50. He missed an extra point on Sunday. You know, those have been three of the best kickers over like the last 5 years. How do you explain that?
So the Justin Tucker one is super interesting to me. And I had said this on a couple of interviews, and then I got a call this last week from a former kicker, and we were talking about it, and he had said the exact same things without either of us knowing, you know, that we had talked about it and done interviews, but we said the exact same thing. And that Justin Tucker is dealing with failure for the first time in his career. And a guy like me, like, I missed a decent amount. So I knew how to deal with failure. Whereas Justin Tucker has not missed. And so he has never dealt with failure. He's had this invincible shield around him his entire career from college to the NFL, you know, and he's been able to not worry about missing. And so he's super aggressive through the ball, and he's confident when he's kicking the ball, and he's never doubting his form and doubting that when I hit it this way, it's going to go through. And that allows you just to be really smooth and aggressive through the ball. You know, if you're a golfer and you get on the tee and you always hit it in the fairway, you don't think about your form when you're driving the ball. You just rip it, and you're going to hit the ball, and you know it's going to go in the fairway. And then all of a sudden you start yanking it out of bounds and hooking it, and you start thinking about your form. And now it's not the same swing. Now everything's different. And you're hoping the ball is going to go where you want it to go rather than knowing it's going to go where you want it to go. That's what Justin Tucker is dealing with really for the first time in his career. And you watch him in some of those games and you can see it on his face. You know, he hits the ball and he's like, I can't believe that just happened. You know, and he's never had to deal with that. And so it's a mental challenge for him more than anything.
You know what? You can absolutely see it on his face. It's the first time. He usually was like, he'd kick it and then be like, what up?
Right.
Like, I mean, like, This is the first time where he's like, I hope it goes in. It better go in, you know? That's a bad place to be.
It is.
Really bad place to be. You know, what you said about mental, okay? Knowing what you know about kicking, would you ever, let's say you were a GM, would you ever draft a kicker high? Like a Guayo or like Jake Moody from your alma mater? Like, I am convinced if you took all of the kickers drafted, period, but in particular the first 4 rounds, more often than not, it doesn't work out. It's not a good investment.
I would, and it's weird being a kicker and valuing the kicking position. I wouldn't draft a kicker at all. You know, like not just the first 4 rounds. To me, if I'm going to go the route and I'm going to go a young guy and I'm a GM, I'm going to bring in 2 guys who I think are really good. And maybe one guy gets drafted. You can't bring him in, or at the most 2 guys. That's fine. You still have a pool of about 20 guys because you're not only bringing in guys that came out of college this year. You're also looking at all the guys that didn't get signed in the last couple of years that are still out there kicking, hoping to get in. And I'm going to bring in two guys and let them compete and put them in pressure situations all through camp. The best way to do that is to make running at the end of the practice rest on their kicks.
Oh,
no more pressure. No more pressure than an offensive lineman looking at you. He just sweated his ass off the entire game or practice. He's dead tired. You make this kick, he gets to go in, get something to eat, and ice up. You miss, he's got to get on the line and run. And you got all those guys, those big guys looking at you like, dude, you better make this kick. That's the most pressure you can have in a non-game setting. And so that's what I would do. Bring them in, put them in those pressure situations, and really see how they respond, and see how they respond to failure. When they miss that kick, how do they come back the next day? And I think that's one of the only ways you can try to see. Like a guy like Aguayo was the same thing. He had not missed through college. And then all of a sudden he gets into camp because you drafted him so high and you moved up to take him into the second round. There was all this spotlight and pressure. And as soon as he missed a couple of kicks in practice, there's articles and everything. And then mentally, he just couldn't handle it. And so it's why I wouldn't spend a high draft pick and really any draft pick on a kicker.
Totally agree. I'm like amazed when they do. Even the guy we're doing this week, former Patriots draft pick,
right.
Chad Ryland, who's now was he fourth round?
Yeah, they moved. I mean, they took him high. And listen, playing for Bill Belichick in that system as the kicking position is tough. It's hard because they are very tough on guys. You need a really mentally strong kicker going in there. And as a rookie, that's a really hard place to be. And he's done much better out in Arizona, free from that and having another opportunity, and then came in and then has kicked pretty well for the Cardinals.
I'm like amazed that Belichick took a kicker in the fourth round. Like that stuns me. It's
surprising that he took a kicker but he really respected the position, even though he's hard and tough on him, because he had Vinatieri and then he had Gostkowski. It's so hard to come in and replace those guys,
right?
And follow those guys, because there's this expectation level for kicking anyways in the NFL now. It's like when I was a rookie, when you and I were rookies, if I was 80%, I was going to keep my job, right? Anything up 85, 90% had a chance to make the Pro Bowl, but 80% was the level where you're like, yeah, we'll keep them. We're not going to get rid of them. Now it's like 85, 86%. So like you can miss like 3-4 kicks in a year. That's it. Otherwise, they're talking about, replacing you and bringing somebody else in. The Patriots, it was even worse because you had, at the time, the greatest of all time, Vinatieri, and then Gostkowski, who was the best of his time. And so now you're coming in, replacing those two guys, and there's a really high level expectation and bar that you have to succeed with.
What is your overall thought so far of the dynamic kickoff? It's funny. It's like we don't really even talk about it much anymore. It's kind of like we're kind of used to it almost.
Yeah, but I don't think it's had the impact. Like, is it much different than last year? The impact it's had is to reduce injuries, which obviously that's a good thing, and that was the intent. I do think if they made it to 35, and I think going forward, if they keep the touchback at the 35, they'll have a lot more returns. And you talk to special teams coaches, and that's what they all say. Like, they're a little disappointed that the return rate hasn't gone up higher than it is, but they knew when you didn't make the touchback to 35 that was going to be the case.
So I guess what I would say is, I forget the numbers, but I think last year might have been 20% returns. This year it's 30%.
Yeah.
Something like that. And then last year, I think the average was like just below the 25-yard line. This year, the average, the starting position is like the 30-yard line. So those are positives.
Positives, but not a dramatic change,
No, it's not dynamic.
It wasn't dynamic. That's right.
I don't think it's fair to call it dynamic. Okay. So I got to ask you, one more, maybe two. You played Michigan, Ohio State. You played for Michigan against Ohio State. You also played a national championship game. You played the NFL for 14 years.
There's the Michigan helmet right behind you there.
Nice. Does anything – why is Michigan, Ohio State different? How is it different from any NFL game you ever played or even national championship, if you think it is?
I absolutely think it is because – and I didn't know it as much because I was from Florida, so I kind of grew up watching Miami, Florida State. Like they were top 5 teams every year, and that was a big rivalry. And Florida State was a big rivalry. So not until I got to Michigan did I know how big the rivalry was between Michigan and Ohio State. But here I am as a freshman at Michigan, and it's the first week of the season, and we have videos playing throughout the locker room, Michigan, Ohio State highlights from like 1970, right? Like Bo Schembechler and Woody Hayes and all these old games all year long. All year long, you heard things playing throughout the locker rooms about that rivalry until it came up. And Ohio State does the exact same thing. And literally, like, we hate each other. Like, Ohio State hates Michigan. Michigan hates Ohio State. We don't want good things to happen to each other. We don't want, it's a Big Ten. We want to see them win the bowl game. No, not Ohio State. Right? They don't want anything good to happen to Michigan. There's no other, I sit there and I think about, there's some good rivalries in high school where, like, your high school rival, you did not like them, right? You just hated them. If you saw them in public, you had animosity towards them. You know, in the NFL, there was no team that we talked about all year. It was just the next team. It was the next game, win the next game. You know, there were some games that had more rivalry to them, you know, like Giants, Philadelphia, or Giants, Cowboys when I was there, some of those games. But in college, like, it's all about beating your rival. You know, that means so much more. And Michigan, Ohio State is special because usually they're really good. You know, usually it's one of the teams is a top 5 team. And when I was in college, every year that I played that game, somebody was undefeated, which is just kind of crazy. Like, one of those teams was undefeated every year that I played in that game. You know, so the national championship implication, because it's the last game of the season, there was so much on that game. Usually the Big Ten championship was on the line. A national championship was on the line. And it just heightened the importance of that game. And then you bring in, you know, all the hate and everything in a very good way, not in a negative way, in a very good way. It just makes it special. When you win that game, it makes your season.
Yeah, it's kind of like Army Navy, which is this week. It's like Army Navy. That reminds me that a lot. Check him out on social media at Jay Feely. More importantly, check him out when we're doing the games on CBS. You know, I know that the Steelers, Eagles, and Lions, Bills will be on Sunday at 4:25. But figure that find us on the Sunday ticket or Red Zone.
Because what Ross and I do, we just make fun of each other the entire game.
Check him out at Jay Feely. Thanks so much, buddy. I appreciate it.
All right, Ross. See you, bud.
We talk about this on the Even Money Betting podcast all the time, but winning at sports betting isn't about luck. It's skill, it's strategy, and Masterclass has a new class, Bet Smart, top sports betting strategies from guys I know like Joe Fortenbaugh, Nick Costos, and other pros. They're going to help you to stop guessing and make smarter bets. How to bet like a sharp. Here's all you need to do. Masterclass always has great offers during the holidays, sometimes up to as much as 50% off. Head over to masterclass.com/Ross for the current offer. That's up to 50% off at masterclass.com/Ross. Again, it's masterclass.com/Ross. And remember, all sports betting involves risk, and you're responsible for complying with all sports betting laws in your jurisdiction. It is the holiday season, which means it's time to hang out with family and friends, drink Smirnoff, the world's #1 vodka and an official vodka partner of the NFL. So many opportunities this year to make football games even more delicious as you watch them. We already had Thanksgiving and Black Friday. Now we've got Christmas, these Saturday games coming up. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff #21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Smirnoff. We do game days.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross, we're going to start things off with the Kansas City Chiefs. They signed cornerback Steven Nelson.
Man, I've kind of lost track on all the guys that the Chiefs have signed this year. But DJ Humphries, they traded for Josh Uche. Who else did they sign to try to make it? They traded for DeAndre Hopkins. Now they bring in Steven Nelson. Basically, everywhere where they identify that they are still not quite good enough, or anywhere where they think, hey, we might be able to get a little bit better here, a little bit better at left tackle, a little bit better receiver, a little bit better as an edge rusher. Now it's a little bit better at corner because they don't have Jalen Watson. They bring in Steven Nelson. Makes sense to me.
Something update from the other day, Cowboys, DeMarvion Overshown. He has a serious injury, and he might be out until 2026.
ACL, MCL, and PCL. Totally blew out the knee. Breaks my heart for that young man who previously had a torn ACL, I want to say either in college or his rookie year with the Cowboys. You know, that's one that sportsinjurycentral.com, Pro Football Doc, they're talking about just how difficult that is to come back from. It's not necessarily career ending, but it is career threatening. Man, I hope he bounces back and can play at a high level. It just breaks my heart because we talked about Jonathan Brooks yesterday, Jack. It's another example. He has not gotten life-altering financial security yet, which his talent would give him, would earn him is the right way to describe that. And now he might never get that chance. That's why I want guys to get it when they can.
The Saints, they're bringing in quarterback Ben DiNucci.
I love it. DiNucci's still alive in the NFL. Staying alive, staying alive. Oh. Had one of the most epic performances in the state championship game I've ever seen. It was incredible.
Couple wide receiver notes. Patriots and wide receiver KJ Osborne, they mutually part ways, and they will activate Cole Strange off of IR. And the Browns, they cut Kadarius Toney after 2 horrific plays.
Unbelievable. He had a taunting on his one punt return, which was a fair catch. Taunting penalty. The other one he muffed. That is incredible. That's the greatest career I've ever heard for a guy. Greatest tenure. I don't understand what happened with KJ Osborne and the Patriots. I really thought that'd be a good fit, and he'd give Drake May a good option. Hasn't been able to get on the field, even though he was stellar with the Vikings. And then Cole Strange, that was a first-round pick by Bill Belichick out of Tennessee, Chattanooga. Curiously, maybe he'll play this weekend in my game. That'd be awesome. I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. If you haven't gotten someone in your life the best gift you can get them, I'm just telling you, it's myfrontpagestory.com, myfrontpagestory.com. Huge believer in telling people how you feel about them. This is probably the easiest and best way to do that. Backofficescheduler.com, humanheadnyc.com, sport